Well, evidently I have bitten the bullet and bought a circular saw. You won't recognise the brand if you're in North America or Europe or the UK or Zito. It's kind of the budget brand sold by a chain of hardware stores in Australia and New Zealand called Bunnings. So I've done a pretty bad job. Now this one's not too bad, but some of them have bits of tear out around the edge. I do have a solution to fill those. I just wish I didn't need to. Anyway, I am putting in rails around the outside. I'm attaching it via a variation of a lap joint, and you'll see what that looks like in a moment. So I'm just clamping it on where I want it to be now and drawing where I need to cut off the leg. Speaking of cutting, let's do that now. Okay, so I've got, and again, I don't know what to call these things. I've got the recesses, I've got the holes cut, and I suppose it would be good if this fits. I'm just turning it over to decide which side is nicer looking. And I think it's probably this one, because you want the nicer one facing outwards. Okay, it's tight, which is good. Okay, that's not bad. Not bad at all. Now I'm going to hold it in place in two ways. One, I'll just glue it, but I'll also put a dowel into the middle to really hold it steady. So before I drill the hole for the dowel, I'm just going to we could just take a ruler, I suppose, but I happen to be taking a square, and just make sure the legs are sticking up at the angle you want them to. Okay, so this looks fine. And there we are. Well, it was a bit difficult. I suppose I could have done it, but I didn't. Filming what just happened. We still say filming even though we don't use film. Recording what just happened. So I put some glue on the tenons and then dropped the top onto the legs with the help of my daughter. Yeah, but as I said, my tenons aren't perfect. I mean, I suppose it's the mortises that are less perfect, really. There is a gap around them. That one's pretty bad. The one down there, well, I won't even show you. Now, this is actually really stable. Even without glue, it is reasonably stable. But I will make it a little more stable. That glue job isn't... Well, there's nothing wrong with the glue job, but there aren't as many surfaces together to glue as I would like because of those gaps. So what I'm going to do, and I'll also use this as a bit of an artistic feature to fill in these holes. Have I mentioned? I think I've mentioned at some point. I'm going to look at my options for using epoxy resin to fill all the gaps so that what I've got is a nice flat surface. So I'll investigate what might be the best product to use and then come back and use it. Now, at the time of me recording this, I haven't glued together the workbench top. You can see the sections sitting around. It's not magic. I'm doing these two jobs at the same time, so you've already seen me put the top together. But while that was going on, I was also doing this. Now, this is, let me give you some context. to tell you what that is. Over here in my garage are some very large pieces of rimu. That's about, wow, how tall is this? Maybe you can, it's more than 5 feet tall. Anyway, it's pretty big. 5 and maybe 5'4" or 5'3", something. Anyway, those pieces of rimu are from a fireplace surround. Did I say that already? No, I've said it twice if I did. It's got to be at least 100 years old. This is the mantelpiece, the top part of the fireplace surround. And it's a great piece, I think, to make a skirt for this bench. So that's what I'm going to use it for. It's kind of messy. It's been in someone's garage for a bit. There's a bit of oil there. It's not perfectly flat. It was quite split. There was a big split there and another one here, so that I wondered whether or not I could use it, but I think I can. I've clamped it with glue in those splits, some polyurethane glue, so it should be okay. The skirt's not going to see a lot of stress. If you don't know what a skirt is on a bench, you'll see. So let's cut this to length and start cleaning it up and see what it can do for us. Well, I've put the piece through the thicknesser and it has come out really nice. You can hardly see. I probably should have showed you just so that you could appreciate how bad the split was. There was a crack there. You can just see the remnant of it. And there was one over here, and they went pretty far down the board so that the whole thing could bend quite significantly. But it's not going to be subject to a lot of stress that would aggravate that crack when it's serving as the skirt on my bench. So I'm quite happy to use that. It looks really good. I'm right-handed, so the vise will be down the left because you plane towards the vise. You'll see more of that later on. But let's press on. Let's make a skirt for the bench out of this. Okay, so let's get this skirt on. Well, before I can put it on, I will have to cut it to the right length. It's close to the right length now. I cut it roughly with a handsaw. What I'll do just now, because handsaws are, well, lots of work, I'll just cut it a bit closer to the line with the circular saw, but because that's not a perfectly clean cut, I won't cut it quite to the line. And then I will use my router with a flush trim bit to give it a nice smooth end, and I'll do the same on both ends. Here's my latest workshop purchase. It is an essential this time of year. It is so warm. Okay, so where were we? There's the skirt, which I'm now ready to put onto the bench, and there's that piece of wood I mentioned earlier. Because when you put the skirt on, you want a decent amount of surface to put the skirt on. Now the side of the bench here, that's actually a decent amount, but I've got the leg here flush with the side of the bench top, so the skirt will sit against that too. That other leg is about 1 millimeter back from the edge of the bench top. It's not quite flush, which isn't ideal. There would probably be enough surface in just the side and the one leg, but to give me a little bit more, I've glued a piece of wood there, a piece of totara, which is one of the woods that it features in the bench top as well, just to make sure, I like things to be overdone rather than underdone. So I'm going to clamp this on, drill the holes through that I will use to insert the dowels, and then I'll get on to gluing. there's the vise that I'm going to install. Now I could just mount the vise directly on the underside of the bench, but I would like the vise to be fairly deep. So I'm going to put some additional thickness on the bench there, and then I will mount the vise thus. So I'll just glue that piece of wood on, and even though it's on the underside, I still have a bit of class. This is another piece of rimu. In fact, it's the same piece of rimu that the skirt is made from. You saw me cut this off earlier in the build. I'll glue that on. That's boring, you don't want to see that, but come back when that's dry and we'll start putting the vise in. I've got the vise, what do you call this? I don't know what any of these parts are called. I've got this part of the vise hard against the skirt, and I'm just, it's full of grease, so I'm getting a very dirty pencil, but that's all right. Just drawing where these holes need to be. That one's not drawn very well, but you can see where it is. I can see well enough to put a center in, and I'll make these holes just a little bit larger than they need to be anyway, because you don't want them to be super tight as the rods and the thread are going through. Right, I guess I'm just going to have to at some point take that risk and drill the holes, but I'm pretty confident in those. That should be fine. Where's my drill? Right, now let's see about coming through from the other side. The vise includes these support collets, which need to be recessed into the skirt, and they provide support for the rods as they slide, when the vise opens and closes. And I thought, how am I going to recess those into the skirt? How am I going to do that? I dare not try to cut something freehand. So what I've done is I've bought a hole saw that has a hole size. Well, it's got a lot of hole sizes, but it's got one that's just slightly larger than the size of the support collet, and I've cut that hole. So I could live with it if the fit was that good. And now I'm going to use this, it's just a piece of MDF, I'm going to use that as a router template. I'll clamp it onto the skirt of the bench and then use a flush trim router bit to cut out the recess. I think that should work pretty well. Well, I'm going to have to make a sliding jaw for the vise, obviously, and I'm going to use what right now looks like an ugly old piece of wood. In fact, I know it's not. This is a gorgeous piece of rimu. That is one pass through the thicknesser, and just look at what is beneath there. That is gorgeous. Told you. Well, the wood is just as gorgeous as I knew it would be, but now that I can clearly see it, I can see that there is a split running along there that actually goes right through. So I have my doubts about whether or not I can use it, which would be a shame because it is nice. I think I've solved my problem with the split wood. All I did is take it over to the bandsaw and, well, completely split it. And then make each edge nice and smooth on my jointer. And now I'll glue that together and proceed with that as my workpiece for the front jaw of the vise. I really don't want to drill holes in the wrong place on that beautiful piece of rimu, which is the jaw. So what I'm doing is, I've got this piece of rimu here. It's a scrap piece from one of the bits that became the legs. That's a crossing out mark because that one was in the wrong place. And what I'm doing is I held this up against the rods down here because the rods are parallel all the way, and drew on the surface of this where they were, and then used the Forstner bit to make the holes, and I managed to get a pair of holes here that work. So now I'll draw a hole around where that thread touches and drill that hole out, and in theory when I put it back on here it should fit all 3 holes nicely. Off camera I cut and routed the jaw to a nice rectangular shape. That's a pretty simple process. Now I finished the template and it's actually still on the rods down there. I'll need to take that off to use it. And what the template will do is, of course, let me ensure that the holes will be in the right place relative to each other. But of course I still want to get the holes in the right place on the height of the jaw. Right, you don't want the jaw sticking up too much or too far down or what have you. So I've sat the jaw on here where I want it to sit height-wise. It's ever so slightly overhanging the top of the skirt. That's okay. I will plane the top of the jaw level with the skirt once this is all done. I did the same thing with the skirt when I was attaching that. And using my square, I'm drawing lines to show where the rods sit. And I'll draw those lines all the way across so that I can then place the template at the right height so the rods will be in the correct location. Okay, let's get this done and let's get over to the drill press and, scary, start making some holes. Now I want to make sure that I didn't put these holes in the wrong place and ruin the jaw. I did the rod holes very slightly oversized, so I should be okay. There's really only one way to know for sure. Easy. Yep, that's fine. That's lovely. I'm not going to screw it up now, and as in, I'm not going to screw the metal to the wood. Actually, partly because I don't have the screws to do that yet. I must get those. But also because there's something I need to do to this jaw. I'll show you now. One of the last things that I'm going to have to do to the vise jaw is to cut an angle onto the inside face, about 2 degrees, so that it's slightly thicker at the top. That's the top there, which means that when you close the vise, it ever so slightly closes first at the top. And I had to think about how to do that, but what I've done is I've put a whole lot of tape there, reasonably thick. I might put a little bit more so that this doesn't sit flat anymore. It's at roughly a 2 degree angle. That's possibly 1 degree, roughly. It won't be exact, but I'm going to pad that up so that it looks like a 2 degree angle, put this through the thicknesser, and that will cut the appropriate angle onto the inside face of the jaw. With the vise finished and the bench nearly done, I'm just going to do one more thing, because it would be annoying if I finished the bench and didn't do this, but then at some point later wished that I had. That's an annoying feeling. You'll notice this bench is offset, so it overhangs the legs at that end. And that's a common design in woodwork benches, and it looks good. It does present a possible problem with this small bench, because this is only large enough to build guitars on. And possibly that wasn't the wisest thing to do. I just like the look of it. With a much larger bench, if you push down on the top of the bench here, this part of the bench isn't going to lift up because there's so much size and weight. With this smaller bench, I found that when I put a lot of weight on the bench down here, occasionally it would tip. the legs would come off the floor. I don't want that to happen, so I'm putting a beam at the bottom so that this will prevent the bench from tipping, and it will just provide a little bit more weight as well. I won't show you that process, but I'll just go ahead and do it now. Okay, so as you can see, I have oiled the legs and the skirt, and the product that I've used, I'm limited by what's available in New Zealand. It's made by Supreme Natural Wood Finishes. It's called Tung Oil Blend. It's a mixture of tung oil and vegetable turpentine, which I've used before, and I like the way that it looks and feels and smells, actually. Okay, time to do the top. I've just put some tape around the gaps that I'm going to fill, just so that I don't make too much of a mess. Hopefully the tape will be redundant and I won't accidentally pour too much in anyway, but let's just see how we go. Oops, making messes straight away. Alright, so I will let that dry, at least overnight. Come back tomorrow and do a little bit more. I'll move on and do this to all the other holes that I want to fill now. Now this may look like a complete disaster, but it's not, trust me. So I filled some of the bigger holes with epoxy resin, and I've sanded those, and they look really good. That's only sanded to 80 grit. It'll look better when I've sanded it more finely. So what I decided when I saw how good those looked is I have decided to go over every little hole that I can find and fill that as well. And then when that's dry, so this will add a couple of days to the process, and that's fine. When that's dry, I'll sand those, and then I'll get everything sanded much more finely, and I will oil the top. Okay, I'm being very particular at this point because this is the final step. This is the very top. I'm oiling, I'll take this mask off, oiling this beautiful surface, having sanded it down to 400 grit, so it's very smooth. Almost ashamed to be using it as a workbench, but I will treat it with some care, and I won't do the very roughest jobs on it. I'm partly making it look beautiful because, I'm going to be using this in the YouTube channel, so it has to look nice. And nice it certainly looks. Check that out. I've given it one good application of that oil product I showed you earlier. I'll give it 3 in total. I can't afford a Veritas vise, but I did buy a Veritas vise handle. Close enough, maybe? It's not perfectly level. Can I adjust that? Oh yeah, it moves a little. I should tighten up these rods too. There's a bit of, there's not really play in there, they're just not tight. But look at what I have now. I have a nice looking, very functional, but very nice looking, more importantly, workbench, on which to build monster guitars. So that's where this channel needs to go back to.